Hi, folks. I think that Ace's musical selection was perfect because I was telling my wonderful panelists, Andrew and Austin, that this is going to be a very live demo. And so I am feeling some pressure. And so just flawless intro. Our goal here today is to be as helpful as possible in the hour that we have. So excited to be joined by everyone live, as well as folks who watch these afterwards. I'm going to introduce my wonderful panelists, let them say a couple of things, and then dig into the agenda. But if this is the first Athena webinar you have been to, special welcome, and please do be chatty in the chat, whether it's responding to things that we've said, whether it's getting to know your fellow attendees, sharing an insight that you've had. We really try to like build a community of folks who, yeah, are just like sharing their learnings as they go. In particular, with something like AI, where let's be real, none of us were attending. I think these sorts of talks, 2 years ago, even like this is incredibly new, and so we're all kind of learning together. So for those of you who put the sweat emoji in the chat, I see you. Okay, so I'm Roxanne Petraeus. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ethena. We provide compliance training, hotline, and a variety of other compliance tools to our wonderful customers. We ourselves are a tech company and so have been incredibly excited about the various use cases of AI and kind of bringing those to our customers. I'm joined by two wonderful panelists. Austin joked that I ought to have put on a beard or at least an AI beard for this to blend in, but alas, I'm the odd woman out here. I'm joined by Austin. He is our VP of Learning Experience, also from Charlotte, for those of you who are joining from there, and has been at the cutting edge of AI in our compliance training, given his team makes the training that we send out to customers. Austin, what did I miss?
I think that's it. I have been at Athena for over 4 years. We make all of the compliance training. If you've sampled it, you've seen our work, and we're very excited to harness all the new tools to make our compliance training even better. So excited to talk to y'all today.
Wonderful. And then also joined by Andrew McBride, the founder and CEO of Integrity Bridge, longtime compliance leader, including former chief compliance officer before that. So bringing a lot of real world expertise as well as like cross pollination. He has a paper on AI use cases. I would strongly recommend checking out. Andrew, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. I think to echo your point about just how fast things are moving with artificial intelligence, I think when I first started out a year ago with Integrity Bridge, a lot of it was around data analytics, but more recently, it's been talking to clients about the development of AI use cases within their companies. There's like huge growth in that space. So I help our clients select the technology, deploy those AI use cases.
It is wild, even as just like a side anecdote. I remember talking to a customer, maybe it was a year ago or so, and they were adding on our hotline in case management tool. And someone on the call from the customer side said, "Do you incorporate any AI into your hotline in case management?" And at the time we didn't. So we said no. And the GC quickly jumped in and said, "I wouldn't want it there anyway." Which at the time I was like, makes a ton of sense. This is kind of a frontier technology. These are very sensitive compliance issues. And a couple of weeks ago, I was on a call, three different calls during the week, all of whom were CCOs who were using AI to do the first drafts of their investigations reports. And I was like, man, a lot changed in a year from just like a hard no legal kind of being understandably very reluctant to me having three different conversations with companies of very different sizes, all of whom were using it directly for their compliance investigation. So that to me was a little bit of a light bulb moment. All right. I'm going to jump right in. I think I kind of shared it, but this is very much a show, not just tell session. I think I personally, Andrew, we've talked about this, have an aversion to kind of going to talks where they say like AI use cases, use AI, and you're sort of left being like, okay, but I was hoping to get something very tactical. So instead, we're really going to lean towards showing tools, which means we're going to do a lot of screen shares, which means there will almost certainly be one, if not multiple, tech fails that we will all experience live on this call. But in the interest of learning, just want to give you kind of the latest and greatest in a very real sense. We're going to talk about three use cases, but then a bunch of different tools within those use cases. The three use cases are training, kind of creation and personalization, smart segmentation. This is going to be led by Andrew, and then AI policy bots, which will be me. Throughout these whole conversations, feel free to put anything in chat. If we said an acronym that you're not familiar with, if we mentioned a tool and you didn't quite catch it, if you want to share, something you're doing, we really welcome that. And then classic disclaimer for all of our materials, which is this is for informational purposes. So Andrew and I did a version of this session as a roundtable a couple of weeks, months ago. Time,
Lost track.
yeah, at some point this year, I believe. And even in updating the content for today's webinar, we realized like, man, a lot has changed. And the reason that we thought that this is such a helpful session for compliance practitioners in particular is AI is clearly like a massive productivity tool for a lot of fields. But if you're in sales, you might not always be thinking about risk. You all are risk professionals, and so we think there's a unique angle to AI with compliance. And also, AI is very confusing, both I think for non-technical and technical folks alike. I am not our company's CTO. I'm a non-technical person, but I've been a tinkerer with AI because I'm really trying to make sure that I can put my hands around it. I would strongly recommend going on LinkedIn right now or Twitter, X, whatever your preferred venue is, and following Ethan Mollick. I also read his book, Co-Intelligence, Living with AI, something like that. I think he, to my mind, is the best person you can follow if you're trying to just keep a pulse on what is going on. And I took this framework directly from him, which is AI is a jagged frontier. So think of, like triangles or something, where sometimes two tasks that are equally difficult, AI will be amazing for one and will fail spectacularly at another in a way that, like, to someone who, is not an AI researcher, isn't inherently intuitive. And so I think the only way to find that edge to figure out where does it work in compliance today and then go check back next week is really to experiment. Okay, enough framing. We're going to get into what I promised was the messy details. But I'd love for folks, if you're open to just put into the chat. I promise I won't call on anyone or anything, but I would love to just see yes or no's of is anyone using AI to create any of your company's training content today? Doesn't necessarily have to be compliance, could be onboarding. Wonderful. I'm seeing some yeses, I'm seeing some no's, no right answer. Just wanted to kind of get a sense of where folks are at. And often I think people come to these sessions sometimes for a little bit of call it group therapy and just a checking with their peers. This is wonderful. I'm seeing limited. For those of you who said yes, do you find it easy? You could just put easy, super easy. I've been frustrated. I threw my computer across the room. Any answers are welcome. So this is just if you are using AI to create any sort of training, have you found it easy, hard, something else? I'm seeing one easy so far. Too
Too easy.
easy. Like that, sort of. Medium. Yeah, I think that's very fair. Wonderful. Okay, we're gonna kind of get into all of this and we'll give our like honest perspectives, and Austin is gonna lead a session in just a minute, really showing like, where some of these oopses can happen and all of that. So I think that AI and compliance training is really interesting, and Andrew, please do chime in here because I think we all agree that if you had a company of 100,000 people, sending all 100,000 people the exact same anti-bribery training, the exact same harassment prevention training, the exact same code of conduct training, that is suboptimal. Feel free to put it in the chat if you disagree, but I think if we all think back to like college or any sort of educational experience, you are typically segmenting the audience because we all are starting from different places, our roles are different, etc. And so the best version of any sort of learning really is tailored. However, tailoring is hard. It is much easier to make one 60-minute version and say, everybody go watch this thing and we're done. I think that's kind of the magic of AI in the compliance training space is that it lets you do kind of true personalization. So not just throwing your company's logo at the beginning, maybe slotting in a video of your CEO, but instead doing things like test out or adaptive learning, where you're personalizing tracks based on a bunch of variables. Andrew's going to touch on some of these, but role, risk, what previous training you've taken, how frequently you've taken it. Have you been at this company for 20 years? You could even get either quite sophisticated or quite creepy, depending on your personal perspective, of bringing in HR data, investigations data. If your team has been involved in incidents, maybe you're getting slightly different training, and a bunch of different factors. Andrew, I know that you've kind of lived this world, so just kind of curious, like what jumps out to you as the exciting components of AI and compliance training?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been developing compliance e-learning trainings, I think, for 20 plus years. And I recall, those early experiences were just painful because of the actual act of putting the training modules together and the scripting. And through the advances in technology, right now through to AI, it's just becoming progressively easier to the point which I think we'll get to where the only limit is going to be the limit of your respective imaginations as to what you come up with. And you'll be able to do more different types of training, which you can then allocate to people who truly need that training rather than the one size fits all.
Sorry, I muted myself because I've got my audio off on so you all can hear. I love that, and we actually have a couple of questions. This is great already have come in, Andrew, that I think are kind of relevant here. Maybe to start, I mentioned AI in investigations, and we have a question that I think is very fair, like use of AI in investigations reporting. Should this be standard practice? Any concerns or risks? I know Athena is going to be hosting a lawyer who specializes in like concepts of privilege in particular as they relate to AI in a future webinar. And in some of my conversations, like this is one that comes up is AI like a paralegal, like Grammarly, or is it an entirely different tool that may impact concepts like privilege? So that's certainly one that comes up, but Andrew, just curious, anything for you on the on anything coming up on AI investigations reporting? It's not a deep dive we have today, but we certainly could in the future.
Yeah. I think my immediate reaction is where you went is the privilege and then data privacy. So it's just another uh, type of processing of personal data. And so does that then mean that you're having to update your data privacy impact assessment if you're doing it in that way? If you have got European Works Council obligations, does the use of AI and how you're conducting and reporting on investigations trigger European Works Council commitments? And so I think that we'll get into this a little bit in the context of policy buddies as well at the end, is that AI opens up just a new front that you have to be thinking about the interplay between other areas where compliance have to manage its own risk on data privacy, cybersecurity, legal privilege, if you are looking to use AI tools in your platforms, whether it be investigations, third-party due diligence, or in training and communications.
In short, we're all figuring this out together. So I think that,
Ex
yeah.
exactly.
Okay, wonderful. Back to training, and someone asked where we're seeing the call it like most immediate impact of AI in compliance. I would argue training because Andrew, all of the concerns that you raised, I think they're somewhat mitigated in the training space. Meaning, for example, you have a human in the loop. I don't know of anyone I've met who is sending out training without reviewing it, AI generated or otherwise. Like that would be a pretty non-standard practice. And so, for example, a lot of the concerns about AI are in hallucinations. And so, if you, for example, which we'll talk about in a second, do AI generated language translations. There's a really obvious way to mitigate the potential risks of that, which is to have, your business partners who are native speakers of any language carefully review it to ensure that nuance and accuracy is there. But curious, Andrew, if anything else kind of comes to mind for you on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that in the um, in the context of training, the training is there, the AI is there as a tool, but you're always going to have the human in the loop driving, whether it's the development of the material, the transcripts of the material, the translation of the material. You're going to have someone kind of checking that before it goes out.
Yes. And so here is a call it like Maslow's pyramid type concept that we Athena have found in terms of where AI is particularly used for compliance training. And this is just more of a framing point, but I think it can be tempting sometimes with all of these cool tools out there to say, like, how can we use AI or tell your teams go use AI? And I think we found that a better way to approach it is something like, what are the biggest problems I have as a compliance professional, et cetera? And then how can AI solve these problems? So kind of going, not having AI be a solution in search of a problem, but instead thinking like, where's the pain points? We found we train a lot of multinational companies, and I love, Elizabeth, your point on German. I will pick German as the example, and you can, I don't know if there's going to be any German speakers, but someone can tell me how we think it did when I live demo this in a second. But we have a lot of multinational companies, and so I think it's and this is what our customers have told me. It is a really subpar experience to be receiving training in a language that is not the one in which you are most comfortable, or to receive language translations that are not good. For example, subtitles only. I mean, it's, better than nothing. Um, but it is not as good as, for example, dubbed videos in the native language. And so we found that language translations are a really magical problem that AI largely can solve, again, with the key caveat of putting human in the loop. So much so that now Athena's approach is actually we are not charging our customers for AI generated language translations. We do it same day, and then either we QA it at our customer's request or the customer QAs it. And this is like cut down massively on both bills and time to launch. So if suddenly you realize your company has acquired an entity in X country and you need to add on that language, no problem. You're not, putting any sort of implementation timeline at risk. The second level, which gets a little bit more sophisticated, is in cosmetic and contextual edits. And so that's more something like I have training that was kind of designed for a corporate audience. Backgrounds might look more like a natural, standard office setting. And we've realized that we need to make sure that we have several entities and they all have different branding or something like that. And I would love for the backgrounds to reflect that. Even more sophisticated might be I want the backgrounds to reflect the fact that we have some folks in warehouse, some folks in doctor's offices, et cetera, et cetera. And so making those kind of background cosmetic, call it like green screen type changes, is another area that AI is really good at. The jagged like frontier is fully custom videos. How many of you see in your Instagram, TikTok, or other feeds a massive amount of AI generated content? I know that I do. Cats seem to appear everywhere and they're always doing, funny things. And so I think it's natural to say, like, okay, could we go to like fully AI generated content? And this is where Austin's going to show sort of yes and sometimes no. But that's, I think, the frontier that at least like at Athena we're going to be pushing towards because I think it's just a matter of time before we get there. But it's certainly not fully ready for prime time. And then I'll say I really love the points on like AI language translation having some fails 100%, which is why I think it is so crucial to have that human in the loop. But I think for a lot of our customers, often the question they're asking is, what's my relevant alternative? My relevant alternative isn't that I can have enough money to like, have an agency in Spain develop content, for that part of the org. And so I think it does kind of solve the problem of like with a limited budget and limited team, how can I make a globally relevant training? All right, we're going to go into our first share. Just everybody be warned. This is where disasters can hide. Okay, so we're looking at compliance training. Athena's compliance training, this is just one example. And what we did here is use our AI dubbing. So you're going to see that this was filmed in English, but we had a lot of, this is going to be very embarrassing. Does this look German to anyone? Does this look German? So vaguely, I'm really exposing my lack of global. I'm going to click on this one. We're going to see how this goes. Welcome feels right.
Hoi.
Hoi.
Hoi. Dit is je training over de gedragscode van het bedrijf. Nou ja, niet.
I think it's actually Dutch. Is that
Dutch. That's
yeah.
Dutch. Yeah.
Sorry. Including to my father who is Dutch. So this is an example of what the thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't see in the chat that you kind attendees were helping me out. So this is an example of the dubbing. I'll play it for like a couple more seconds so you all can see. We'll just experience it in Dutch. But again, this was filmed in English and then instantly translated into, I think here we do something like 10 But Austin, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the AI, like the API that we use, is something like 200 plus. Like you're really kind of covering all of the languages, maybe with the exception of like really niche dialects that we don't have. Austin, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. More for just text, fewer for language dubbing, but it's in the hundreds.
Cool. All right, let me just play it for a couple more seconds so you all can get a sense. Obviously, with playing it over Zoom, it's not always the playback speed isn't flawless, but I think you'll find that like if you were looking at this, you would probably notice that they aren't fully natively speaking. But I would argue, please put in chat if you disagree, that this is a better experience than just having the subtitles.
Iets dit. Dit is een set, maar deze training, je snapt het. Ik hoef het niet uit te leggen. Als de klassieke westernfilm ons iets heeft.
And so you get the slightly different, you can tell each actor, sounds slightly different, as does the translations. Okay, so that's kind of the base pyramid that we were looking at. Now let's get a little bit more fancy. Let me go back to screen share. Okay, so this is, oops, sorry. I promised that this was going to be messy, and messy it will be. Slide. What we're next going to look at is a full AI avatar. This person is not a real human to any of our knowledge. Let's play.
Aaron keeps liking and commenting on every photo I post online, and last night he messaged me saying I'm beautiful. It's making me feel weird when I see him in the office. What should I do?
So this is an example of something that Austin and the LX team here at Athena made that is a bit more complex than just changing the background or something. Again, this was prompt based. So like Austin created this via text, prompting a AI like Gen AI model versus anyone in studio. I think, but I just lost my chat, so let me pull it up to see what you all think. That this is pretty good, and if I saw it, I wouldn't immediately clock it. I think if you pay close attention, you sort of realize there might be a little bit of an uncanny. Yeah, thank you, Athena. Like I think it's quite good, and I think it speaks one to the tech getting quite good, and two in particular, like Austin's team working with these tools very frequently, and getting really good at wrangling them. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna stop my screen share, and Austin, I'll turn it over to you to walk through some of the examples we had talked through, and I'll kind of ask you some questions as you do it, but I'll give you a second to pull up your screen share because I know that that always takes a minute. And while I do it, Austin and I were chatting beforehand, and I was kind of asking like, hey, what are the scenarios that are particularly good for AI and compliance training? And he said that this type of scenario of call it either a talking head or someone setting up a scenario is quite a good one. If you want to get to something more complex, like two actors interacting, which Austin's going to get to in a minute with kind of a bit of a fail, it's not so good there. But Austin, let me mute myself and turn it over to you. And if you could talk us through kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah, so my team really views AI as a sort of another tool in our toolbox. It's not the end all be all, but it does offer us way more possibilities than what we had before. We have our own studio in New Jersey, a stable of actors in New York. We have animation capabilities, and so this is another thing that we can use to make different training or the solution that a customer is looking for. But it's also important, like those of you that said you might have run into some frustrations, you sometimes might run into those with AI as well. My team has been working on this stuff a lot, and sometimes it still goes in directions that you don't expect it to. So here is a couple of examples. Like that one you just saw of the woman walking on the street. Again, these are with using Google's VO3. So you're limited to 8 seconds. So you really need to get creative on like, how can I set up a situation or a snippet of a scenario that feels like a good way to start a prompt. And so sometimes you're thinking about the middle of a conversation or just a quick observation of something, and then you can kind of build more scenarios around that. And so here's just a couple of examples that we did recently, and this was just like an hour before this call started. So we had one that's very vague with create a video where a manager at work said something questionable, and that was all that we got in the prompt, and you'll see here how that goes.
Well, technically, if you think about it, that's not really my department, is it?
So that was weird. He didn't say anything questionable, I think, and he maybe asked a question. And also it put a strange sound effect in there. So not exactly what we were looking for. So we got a little more specific. Create a video where a manager tells an employee she should smile more. And this is what we got from that.
You know, you really should try to smile more.
It would make you seem more approachable.
Okay, so we're almost there with this one. This often happens when two people are talking to each other in one of these AI models that she said what he should probably be saying. It would make you more approachable. Instead, she said the rest of the phrase. And you notice I didn't tell them specifically what to say. I just said he should smile more. He should tell her to smile more. And so that's it kind of freestyles off of that. And so a lot of this is experimentation. A lot of this is working with it over and over again. And I will say can be costly for depending on where you're at. So over at Athena, we have the ability to prompt more often and with higher frequency than some folks might have. So if you run into this and you're like, oh, I'll just try again, you might end up it'll put you in timeout eventually and say, well, you can't generate any more of these until next week or something like that. And then you're like, well, that's a roadblock. We're very fortunate we don't have those limits, so we are able to just keep iterating, keep iterating. So I'll show over on my other screen. I'm sorry, I have to juggle screens here. And Roxanne, stop me if there
No, no,
are.
no, you're doing great. And I think what we're going to see next is an example of more of the contextual, if you wanted to sort of change a background or, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to show.
Yes.
Yep, you go.
So this was one that this is the prompt for that video that we all watched earlier. And you can see create a video as if shot from a selfie camera on a phone. A mid-20s white woman with dark hair records herself as she walks to work in Brooklyn. She has a pair of AirPods in and occasionally looks down at the camera. She is talking to a friend and is a little concerned as she says, Aaron keeps liking, commenting on every photo I post online. And last night he sent me a message telling me I'm beautiful. It's making me feel weird when I see him in the office. What should I do? And then we got this one, which was quite successful. It's very convincing. Don't look too closely at it because you'll notice when her other hand comes into the screen, she's also holding a phone in that hand, and you're like, "Wow, she's a two-phoner, huh?"
Maybe
But
she's a consultant. This is
yeah, maybe
yeah.
she's recording on a phone. She has a phone. That's fine. But also, this took experimentation to get to this point because we had to work around like, okay, how much can be said in 8 seconds? And we put the description of this person in here because there is a photo on the previous page that's like a stock photo, and we wanted to see if we could match this person to the stock photo. Because again, you might see some of the biases involved when you just say, as you saw in the last one, I said a manager tells an employee to smile more, and it immediately picked a man and a woman, and with the way that man looked. So there are also things that might come out from like you being vague, and it doesn't come the way that you want. Then one more example, I'll scroll all the way down here. Two female office workers are arguing at their desk, and a third person raises their head up above the cubicle wall to interrupt them.
By EOD, and I told you I have other priorities.
Excuse me, is everything all right over here?
I
Uh,
specifically
this one is, I find it personally hilarious. Just the timing of it. I wasn't supposed to be funny. This woman is very heated. But the way the guy comes up at the end, we actually ended up using this in a different video without the sound. So as a like a bystander intervention kind of thing, as people are talking over this. So again, we use this almost as like stock video, but it was exactly what we wanted from that stock video rather than having to search for it. So
Austin,
that,
I'm thinking,
go ahead.
because I love this, but I'm looking at time and I'm realizing, which makes total sense. Like these always generate a ton of questions, and we have a lot more. I think what we'll do is let's go. I'll quickly do the quiz one. We'll go to Andrew for more context, and then either if we have time after, or if folks are interested, just let us know, and we can share a little like Loom video or something of some of these others. But Austin, tell me if you'd agree. I think the takeaway is like there's some amazing stuff, and like when it really nails it, it's pretty magical because, you didn't have to put a woman in Brooklyn and, get a whole shoot just to do that. And there's a lot of nuances. And then in particular, when you think about compliance training, accuracy, nuance, brand really matters. Most companies don't want close enough when it comes to their enterprise-wide training. And so our perspective has been like, to the extent we can, we're really just white gloving and helping customers navigate, when a tool might be appropriate and when it's like actually the old school way of doing this is right.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's a tool in our toolbox. We will sometimes sometimes it gets it right in one and you're like, awesome, that was great. A lot of times it's a combination of things or it becomes an element of something that inspires something else or builds into our training. And that's where we've really seen it unlock more potential where before we would be like, we could try that, but it's a 4-day shoot, might cost the customer, $20,000 to do this. And instead we're like, well, what if we tried AI and we could get most of the way there or get what it is they're looking for? And that's really unlocked a lot of stuff for us.
I love that. And I think again, in my like personal AI use, I think using it as like a creative partner versus just like hoping that it's going to get it right on the first try is a really great way to go. All right. Let me come up with another example we have, and I'll be screen sharing here. So curious, like folks put into the chat, how many of you currently do test out for your compliance training? Maybe your code of conduct, meaning employees can, if they, get over a certain score or whatever the quite structure is, that you allow them, yep, I'm seeing one, to test out of training. I'll say we, Athena, offer this, and it feels sometimes like our customers who deploy this have brought like fire from the gods to their teams. It has just been like incredibly popular, in particular with code of conduct. And my personal perspective, I know that compliance professionals, so Andrew, feel free to weigh in, have understandable kind of pros and cons of test out. However, I think it can be a really magical tool because it allows the training to be very targeted, right? Like if I got the data privacy question or questions wrong, and then I'm receiving more data privacy training, well, that kind of makes sense in my mind. That's like a very targeted training approach versus a one size fits all spread peanut butter evenly. Um, but creating tests is hard. Like it takes a lot of work. Your codes of conduct might be 8 pages, might be longer. And if you think like, okay, I want to make sure that these questions address varying topics, but I'm very busy, I don't like starting from scratch. We actually found out about this tool, and if you're interested and you're an Athena customer, just reach out to your customer success representative, and we can help you with that. It's not yet available publicly, but long story short, we had a customer who is an MIT professor, and this is how we got connected with this, which I think is quite neat. And what it does is takes a document. So here I just uploaded Athena's own code of conduct, and you tell it how many questions you want. And then it gives what I think are quite nuanced questions that you might use either in creating a check on learning. So, a classic, you can't pass before you answer this question, or test out at the beginning of training. So, for example, here we say, Athena's policy talks about board. Alex has been invited to join the board. It's already a vendor and plans to purchase 50K worth of shares. According to policy, which action must Alex take? To my mind, that's like a pretty nice question, and you may want to tweak it a bit, but I find it's often easier to start with a bank of questions and edit versus start from a blank page. And so this is just like an example of a very easy, I think it took about a minute once I ran the a prompt, and you could ask it for 50 questions and pick the best, 8. But I think that that's just like a really nice a way to have a partner to iterate with versus having to do everything from scratch. Andrew, let me turn it over to you because I think we've kind of covered some of the basics for training to talk about segmentation.
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. What's super interesting about the video generation idea, is just how it's going to break down the barriers to being able to develop more tailored training that you can get to the people that need it. I've been experimenting with AI video generation myself. Some of you may have seen my LinkedIn post where I've been using Sora to generate mini video segments to get a point across to supplement the text that I've got in my post, and it's got great traction. I think more broadly, particularly with those 8-minute segments beyond your traditional e-learning, to the extent that some of you have got internal social media platforms where you could post a 8-minute segment on a gifts and hospitality reminder or something like that. It kind of broadens out the range of employee engagement, and you're communicating in a form like that social media engagement that many employees are very familiar with. we're going to switch tack now. That if the takeaway from the start of the session is that your training can be more tailored, your AI-driven training can be more tailored, inertia or that resignation of the pain of going through and developing, just the one module, you're now able to develop multiple individual micro modules much quicker, much faster, which then it frees you up to, rather than giving the same training to the entire population, to actually pick and choose very curated training or training segments and then allocate them to individual employees. And it's interesting that now, because of the development in each actual generation of those training modules, it's almost as if the way in which you assign that training has to kind of then play catch up. And this goes to the quality of your employee metadata, the quality of your learning management system, and how that is then able to smartly allocate training to those people who need it. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got that evolution of role-based assignment. And so, as I say, the old school approach was everyone gets a training. And then several years ago, particularly with the advances in HR information systems, LMSs, you're able to kind of allocate training by role. But as we'll talk about, I think that with the combination of some of the enhanced data analytics that many of you are now doing around compliance program effectiveness, and cultural health assessments, that those themselves can be a basis for triggering training. So rather the trigger being time-based, every year an employee gets a training, the triggers can be defined events based on some of your other compliance program metrics. So how can AI support the identification of who needs to get that training? So there's at least one person on this webinar who will recall the painful process that we went through at Albemarle back in the day of walking through the HR role descriptions and trying to figure out that for any particular training like conflicts of interest or third-party risk management or antitrust, whether that particular role needed to get assigned that particular substantive training. And that is a fairly painful process. Now with AI, even just a basic ChatGPT Copilot tool, you could upload those role profiles, not the employee data, but the role profiles. And based on whatever the training materials, you upload the draft training material, you upload the role profiles, and then AI will be able to kind of flag those roles that it thinks are appropriate for being assigned, and then obviously have someone review it, or the AI is checking the provisional role assignment that you may have already done. That can be a huge time-saving tool. The other rich data source as a validation of who your at-risk audience is the data that's contained in your other compliance platforms. So thinking your third-party due diligence platform, your investigations case management platform potentially, and others. And where I'm going with this is you may have come up with a baseline list of who you think needs to get training on the risk associated, anti-corruption risk associated with using third parties. But you've also got a rich data source in your third-party due diligence platform of who are those people who are actually tasked as being the sponsor of a given third party. And so by doing the compare and contrast analytics, of taking all of those sponsors out that due diligence platform and aligning that with your provisional assignment using just regular HR learning data, you can get that blended, data-driven, informed approach to who are the employees that truly need that training. And it can go even beyond your compliance platform. So again, at Albemarle, we went in and looked at who were the people that were approving invoices. Those people that were approving invoices got training on how to spot red flags in invoices for fraud and corruption. Just a really simple data analytics exercise of extracting that information from the company's ERP system, going through that data, comparing that with our current trainee list and seeing if there were any gaps. So then over on the right-hand side, what's super interesting to me is is the ability to move from it just being a time-based trigger for training to actually moving beyond your data analytics dashboards, but it driving action. And one of the most important actions is the assignment of targeted training. So some of you may already manually, when there's an event of a discipline or poor performance from an ethics compliance point of view, there is then a note that as part of the investigation remediation, one or more employees may need to get assigned remediation training for a particular area. But it can extend to other areas. So if you have a controls management platform, or if you've got a process for identifying control breaches through your monitoring activity, then that's also can serve as a basis for a trigger. And it can go on to things like how your employees are engaging or not with your ethics and compliance program. So rather than just relying on a dashboard to drill through, can your dashboard flag or even trigger automatically the assignment of supplementary training on how your investigation process works or speak up process works if in a particular region or a particular site there is a low speak up rate? And you'll see some of the other examples. It's that same principle of using the data from your program effectiveness and your cultural health dashboards, using those to trigger then very targeted allocation of training to those people who truly need it. And ultimately, where I think this could go is that you could end up having a truly personalized code of conduct training, and that every employee is just being assigned different mini modules created by AI based on their role, also triggers for their particular location or their site, maybe even triggers for them personally, subject to data privacy considerations. But what you're trying to get is the employee is being assigned advanced training on topics that they need to address based on either their own activity or the general kind of environment within their particular location. I think that's where it's going to go. The question is whether things like the learning management technology and the data analytics technology is going to enable us to get there.
And Andrew, how much adoption, like candidly, how many companies are kind of doing this, like in this like sophisticated way you've laid out?
So what I could, for sure, you've got the analytics happening in one place. So whether it's the dashboards or, and then it requires employees to go into the dashboards and interpret it. They go, okay, I now need to kind of allocate training to these particular employees in this location as a remediation measure. What there isn't at the moment is that middle piece of, okay, the data analytics is telling us this, it trips a certain threshold of speak up or a lack of engagement with our code or our policies. And so we're now going to automatically kind of trigger the assignment of training to a small group of employees in that particular location. That to me, I think it's technically possible. Are companies doing that yet? Not as much.
And then last question here, I feel like is you often hear when these sorts of ideas of like getting very targeted and really improving your risk identification, that the next fear that is raised is often, well, doesn't this kind of create a maybe burdensome paper trail of risks that now a limited compliance team, now sort of has been put on notice and now needs to go do something. And maybe that, the list used to be 3 and now it's 75 because you ran a sophisticated analytics. Just curious your perspective on that concern.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there is that expectation, and obviously many of you are familiar that we did go through a FCPA investigation. We ended up presenting to the DOJ and the SEC. But if you look in the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, there is expectation that you're testing your program effectiveness and you're trying to measure your cultural health, and that needs to be data driven. So there's this expectation that you're doing that analysis. The really key thing is, what are you doing about that? And one thing that you can do to address any pockets of issues that you find is training. And so it's trying to join the dots between the dashboard and the remediation being training, how can you make that connection more painless and less administratively burdensome?
I think that makes sense. And I'm kind of hearing you say a sophisticated version of the ostrich defense is not particularly compelling. And, as these tools become more readily available, if your answer is just like, I don't use them because I don't want to identify a lot of risks, that may not be the most defensible
Right.
approach.
Right, and you just want to make sure that your program's working, and also that there is that kind of healthy culture, and so the analytics helps to shine the light, and then the assignment of targeted training can kind of get to where you really need to get to, rather than trying the blanket approach.
I love that. Thanks for putting that in the chat. I think that's a great another example is like, in I think other parts of HR, like identifying attrition risk. Like these are sort of muscles, for lack of a better term, that companies are kind of starting to already employ. And even though it might sound a little minority report, I think there's like real value to having a predictive approach to these sorts of issues, whether they're compliance or HR versus just more of a reactive. The last area that we're going to talk about will probably spark some discussion, which I think is great because that's exactly what we're aiming to do. So it's the idea of a chatbot, and we're going to show Athena's live. I was attempting to break it and be all sorts of difficult with it, so you can see some of the questions I asked it, and we can even, if you want to put into the chat, we can throw some in to see how it does. But before we kind of see it live, let me explain what it is and then give some framing. So as I mentioned, Ethena has a variety of tools. So a company, maybe our customer, now has the ability to turn this on. Our approach has been default off for these sorts of AI tools because, there's a variety of reasons why you may or may not be comfortable with them. But we now have our customers have the ability to turn on an AI chatbot that is trained on their company's policies, their company's training. So instead, you may say, like, well, why would I need that? I already have an enterprise-wide license to ChatGPT or Gemini. You could absolutely, today, if you're a ChatGPT shop, load in all of your policies, right? So you identify your code of conduct, your anti-bribery, your anti-retaliation, and essentially train one of these enterprise-wide LLMs to just reference those policies and allow your employees to look at it. And I've absolutely heard of folks who are doing that. The reason you may not want to is that on the spectrum of like generative AI toward more being like a really good control F search function, in policy land, most people I talk to want to be more on that, like a better version of searching through PDFs and not a very creative generative AI version because, this isn't a human in the loop reviewing the answers. So if an employee goes to it and asks a question and all you want to do is surface the relevant information versus kind of have the AI generate information because you can imagine hallucination, a bunch of other risks, even if it's not just hallucination that you may not be comfortable with. I think, but Andrew and Austin, feel free to weigh in here, that I think this is where the world is going, mainly because I think employees are, I personally can speak to it. I'm getting very lazy. I get very annoyed now if I have to search through anything because I'm getting so used to AI popping up in all of my tools. I had a meeting with a customer last week, and I historically would have gone into something like a Salesforce and looked at all the customer information, and instead I was able to essentially just prompt an AI tool to say, what's the deal with this customer? What's the, latest we've had? Just like give me basically a report. And in an instant on my phone, I had it. And so I think that employees, and I'm curious, put into the chats, like if you all agree, are starting to get really accustomed to these magical breakthroughs with any interaction they're having with the company. And so they're going to expect it of HR. They're going to expect it of compliance at some point. Andrew, does that resonate? Like, do you kind of see this going this way? And do you have any sense of like timeline? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
So I would say that policy engagement is the most common use case that ethics compliance teams are exploring based on my interactions to date. Just for the reasons that you describe, I think that there's a practical point of scope? So is it just the ethics compliance policies that are kind of going in, or is it the entire kind of company policy framework that is going in? That's a question. But for sure, the value of this, just the level of comfort of employees dealing with this and now expecting to deal with an interface like this is critical. I think the only thing I would flag is that it's still really important for ethics and compliance teams to be having that face time with people, that they don't sit behind a policy chatbot, that engagement face to face is critically important.
I think that's exactly right. And I'll kind of go into like just a live demo so we again can sort of see what we're talking about here and then talk through some of these concerns. So I am notoriously a troll within our company of trying to break things, but I actually think there's a very good reason to do this with these tools, which is I was in the army a long time ago, and I feel like compliance professionals probably have this perspective too. Any scenario you can imagine someone has done. And so I think like if you have a bot and you do not expect an employee to put in wild, inappropriate, weird things, like in my opinion, that's probably wrong. And instead, you as the compliance professional should really test drive these things before you deploy them wildly. So I wanted to see what our bot, and again, this is an Athena product that is trained in this particular case on Athena's own internal policies. If Andrew, you were rolling this out at a company that you consult with, it would be trained on their policies, so you're not going to see the exact same answers. You're going to see references to theirs. But I think this works well for demo purposes. So the first thing I did is, like, and I'm sad, what should I do? Because this is sort of an example of, I'm sure we've all seen screenshots of, or New York Times articles of kind of the intersection of AI and mental health. And like candidly, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of areas where this goes wrong. So I wanted to see what it would do. The way that we've in particular like trained this bot is to, if it doesn't have any information, to say, I can't find any information about that in the available files. I think that's pretty good. You might say an absolute best case scenario is that you flag something to an internal team, and I think those are all things we can talk about. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that, or what I wanted to test for myself and then share it with you all, is like that I think is the more appropriate world in which this might work. Because you can't really have a chat bot in which you assume that employees won't ask weird things. So then I said, I hate my boss. What should I do? And Andrew, this is kind of exactly your kind of where you're getting to here, which is like ideally these are tools that maybe are a first line of defense, or you could, acknowledge that maybe not all employees are likely to reach out directly at first, like that's not their inclination, but you want to make sure that these tools are encouraging a conversation in that FaceTime that is so crucial. So here's the answer I got here. Please excuse me continuing with the news of the weekend. So then I, had to ask it. I'm thinking of asking the CEO to go to Coldplay concert with me. Is this a good idea? That gets cannot find any information. This would be something that if you put into an open a enterprise-wide LLM that is searching the web, you would get information on individuals, but here it doesn't do it. And then I thought the interesting one was I really want to get a contract signed. Can I send the prospect an iPad if they sign by Friday? Put into the chat if you could envision a salesperson asking something like this. And here it says, according to the code, gifts must be a minimal value. Again, these are Athena's policies. So, here it is. And then I thought this was like pretty good, but we'll get into, I think, Gabriel, what you're getting at, which is sending a prospect would likely require approval from finance. Always check with finance or legal before offering such incentives. And then finally, the thing that this does is it surfaces the relevant policy so that the employee hopefully is going to that policy. So we have a question of how do you mitigate risk of a chatbot authorizing or approving based on the wrong reasoning? My perspective is that you're not in a zero risk world with these tools. Like you just aren't. But if your company already has an enterprise-wide LLM, Gemini turned on or whatever, there is nothing stopping an employee, and you all should test it out today, from going into that non-compliance tool and asking a compliance question. I could go into ChatGPT today and ask it the exact same question, and it is going to be searching the web and giving an answer. So my perspective is more like think through a risk matrix of like what can employees do today? is this better or worse than that? And what could I, what can I put in to mitigate any risk? But Andrew, curious your take, because like, again, this is very brave new world.
Yeah, so I mean, completely agree with you, Roxanne. I mean, I think that this is not just an issue for a compliant chatbot. It's also for any enterprise GPT, Copilot type environment. The risk is the same, and so you can kind of limit it strictly to the defined content and just have it be a pure interpretation tool. And if there's no information, then it's like we have no information available on that. You could then supplement it a bit more with a bit more discretion. So maybe if an employee says that they're sad, that there's some sort of link in with the employee assistance line so that they've got then a connection to someone where they can have a conversation rather than leaving an employee hanging. Where it gets to kind of interpretation and judgment on the part of the AI, then I think that that's where the red team in the testing, if you're going to go down that path, you really have to kind of think very broadly about the testing and being very, and there is, if we are developing use cases ourselves, such as the policy chatbot, then what are the controls to make sure that we are in compliance with relevant laws? That's absolutely key. So we were talking as conference prep, webinar prep for this, about how how does it respond when there is a genuine concern being reported, and then the chatbot decides it's going to try and incentivize the employee from either speaking up or escalating it to a prosecutor or regulator, which would be a problem from a whistleblower compliance point of view. And so through the setup of the policy chatbot, it's not just about uploading the documents, it's through that prompt engineering, you're setting the controls and the lanes in which it's able to swim in. That's super important for your own legal compliance perspective.
I love that. I know we could probably talk about the nuances of, in particular, like risks and all of that today for quite some time. But in the interest of time, I think we have about 2 more minutes. Want to make sure we get everyone out on time. Ace, I believe you had a survey for folks because we always want to know what's useful, what resonates, what doesn't. Thank you so much. If you all are willing, thank you so much for spending the time with us. If you're willing to fill out the survey, it really does help us to make sure that we continue to provide information that's most useful to you all. I know we didn't get to all of the questions that were put into the Q&A, so we'll try to do that, via email and other follow-ups. But finally, I want to thank my fellow panelists, Andrew and Austin, for kind of sharing all of your knowledge here. I think it's just like so interesting and neat that each time we do this, we are talking about new and different use cases.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you all. Take care.